I know. Okay, we gotta post this up on the Slackses. So here we go. Oh gosh, that is way too much. I need the invite code here. This is gonna make an interesting recording. Okay, so there we go. Dupe. Let's just start sharing our screen here. Boop. Okay. All right. I'm going to move you over here. There we go. All right. We are just going to give it a couple minutes. If you're watching this after the fact, we're just waiting for a couple more people to drum in before we get started. We got about maybe 5 minutes or so. We'll give people. I will definitely close down Slack though. Boop. Close that down. Close that down. All right. I think everything else should be fine. Christine, hello. Welcome, welcome to the walkthrough.
Hello, how are you?
We're doing okay.
Good. I'm mostly going to have to, I'm sorry. I'm mostly going to just be listening for right now. I've got some homework I'm working on, but I didn't want to miss this, so.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's also recorded, so you'll be able to reference this whenever you like. As soon as I get it up on Vimeo, I'll post it up and you'll have it. So.
Sounds good. Thank you, Richard.
Oh, no problem. No problem. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes. Let's let a couple more people maybe drum in, and then maybe about 10 after we'll go ahead and roll.
Okie doke. Thank you.
Hola.
Hello. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
So just to fill everybody in, today what we're going to do is we're going to go over a couple of techniques I use to Google problems, and it should be actually a relatively quick one. I know I say that a lot, but it should actually be a pretty quick little thing. Things we won't really cover are all of the little intricacies of the things you can put into Google to make things happen. I'm going to focus more on ways and techniques that I use to find the answers I need. And, you know, some of these you may already know, some of them you may not. But generally, I'll go over just what I do to find the answers I need through Google. And, you know, it doesn't always work, but it usually gets me somewhere that I need to go. So that's the plan today. And we'll give it maybe like 1 more minute or so, and then we'll just get going, you know. That way we can record it, and then people will have it for later too. So if you have any questions while we're doing this, feel free to speak up a little bit, and we'll try to get those questions answered. But as usual, try to keep them a little bit topical on Googling for help or anything like that. So just make sure if you got questions, you keep them a little bit in the same ballpark kind of thing. And I'll definitely let you know if it's a little bit out there as far as a question. So. But one thing I'll note as we're waiting here, it may not seem like a very popular thing or it may feel dirty, I guess, right, to Google things. But But even when you're working at a job, and I know this just through a lot of the work, I've been in the industry a while and stuff like that. You're always going to be Googling. So it's not always about, finding errors. Sometimes it's about finding how to do something or finding out how other people do something. And that is very common, even among, seasoned veterans and senior developers. So, and I've held the title of senior developer before, and I can tell you that it's still a thing. Even if you spin around and ask the person working next to you, your teammates working next to you, they may just Google it themselves. So Google is a really powerful tool to help us find answers when we don't necessarily know the full answer or when we run into errors or something like that. So we'll try to clear up some common techniques. So it's right about 10 after 5. So we'll get started here. So the very first tip I have for you guys is number one, you always, the first word you should always put in your Google search is either your language or framework. So for example, let's say now you guys may have advanced past the array portion of the curriculum, but even if you haven't, let's just say you're looking for how to loop over an array, right? And let's say we're doing this in JavaScript. So the reason the language matters is because even though basically every language under the sun has some sort of looping mechanism, the syntax to do it can be different. So basically the concept would be the same, but the syntax may differ. And that's why we always start with a language. So for JavaScript, I usually just do JS. You can type out JavaScript if you want, though. Then what we're going to do is we're going to try to come up with a couple of keywords. And this is where kind of intuition comes in. Just a couple of keywords that may get us what we want. Now, typically I start with the most important part, which is we're talking about arrays. So we're going to do arrays or just array. And then you're going to get a lot of options here. If you're doing this up in your URL bar, which I do a lot, this may not be an option. So I usually generally ignore these. But then I kind of go into keywords that are specific to what I'm trying to do. So I'm in JavaScript, I'm working with arrays, and I want to loop over one. So let's just do that. So the very first thing I get is a Stack Overflow, and now your results may vary, right? So Google is kind of known to kind of keep track of different people in different ways. So for me, Google knows I'm a developer because basically most of my Google searches are developer related. So your results may vary a little bit, but typically if you stick with the formula of language, then sort of like the general maybe thing, and then like a more specific thing, generally that'll get you similar results. Now, the very first thing that comes up, and usually within the first 5 results of whatever we're searching for dev-wise, is going to be a Stack Overflow. Now, there's lots of arguments for against Stack Overflow, but Stack Overflow is going to be a really awesome resource to find answers you need. And in this case, it's going to be a really good resource for array loops simply because it's going to be a person and not documentation. So, for example, let me just open some stuff up here. So if I go to array.prototype.forEach from MDN, if you prefer W3 schools, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I typically go to the Mozilla Developer Network myself. I typically don't do W3 all that much, but we're kind of splitting hairs at that point. So if we open up this, though, on MDN, it's gonna feel very academic, right? It's going to be, this is how an array for each loop works, and this is all the different syntax, and this is all the different parameters for the different things in it. So it's very academic. It's a documentation, right? So there's no thought behind it, I guess. There's no thought behind what's better, what's not better, that kind of thing. And sometimes this is exactly what I need. This is exactly what you're going to need, is just a confirmation of, okay, the callback, the first argument in the callback for a for each is the current value. Sometimes you need that. And that's where W3 and Mozilla come into play. But when we're talking about something a little more esoteric, a little more generic as a for loop or a loop, right? Like what are some ways I can loop over an array? Typically, you're going to want Stack Overflow or a tutorial for that. And that is because you might end up needing something a little more fulfilling as far as getting it done. So I always typically go for Stack Overflow on these topics. So if we go here, typically, I'm just going to be honest, I skip the question altogether. Now, why is that? Because the question is right here. So I look at this question, then I go over here and I immediately scroll down. I don't even look at any of the comments or anything on the first question part. I immediately go to the answers. Now the little check mark that ends up here, sometimes that's good. Occasionally you're going to end up with something like this where it's got 3,100 upvotes but no check mark, and that's probably because this other one might have a check mark. No, it doesn't. Okay, so and the check mark really comes into play on Stack Overflow because the original question, the owner of the original question gets to mark certain answers correct or not. So what you're really looking for is you're looking for something you can read over where you can kind of get a good feeling of what of the answer you're looking for, and not necessarily like confirmation bias or anything like that, but something that makes sense for you and your code base that you can use. So in this case, we have an answer where he's going, create an array, then get the length of the array, and then loop over it based on the length. Pretty basic, right? JavaScript 101. And I apologize if you're going through JavaScript 101 right now. There's a good way to loop over an array. But then typically the best answers on Stack Overflow are going to be the longest ones, okay? And why are they the longest ones? Because usually that means the person that is making the answer is going to explain why. The worst answers you can possibly get on Stack Overflow are, number one, people who say just don't do that. That doesn't help, right? So if you look at almost everything on Stack Overflow, there's at least like one guy who's like, oh, you shouldn't be doing it that way, and you can just ignore them. But number two, the longer the answer, the more explanation you have and the more detailed it gets. So some of the answers for this will probably go into, this is the best array because this is the best loop for an array because it's more performant, or it's more concise, or it's more readable. But the best answers are really explaining your different options without bias. So, this one we have, this is a way to do a loop as well. So, and then down here we have a way to loop over properties in an object. So, and it's almost an academic answer, but it also has that feeling of a human is behind it, right? So someone is sitting down and showing me all of the different options I have so I can make a decision on which one is best for my case. So, and of course, when you're looking up errors and stuff like that, which we'll go over in a minute, it's going to be slightly different, what you're looking for. But when you're looking for more kind of, generic topics that don't have a definitive answer, then that's going to be the best thing. But anyway, I digress. Back to Google, right? Back to Googling. So you're also going to get, on Stack Overflow on Google, you're going to get these other options. The very first thing you should always keep in mind when looking at Stack Overflow answers is not just the question and seeing if that question is relevant to what you're doing, but also this right here, the date. Now, yes, on Google, you can limit things by date, but typically I don't do that. I look at the dates of the content, and if the content doesn't have a date, so like right here, this doesn't have a date, sometimes I'll go to it and sometimes I'll just skip over it. It really depends on what you're needing and how you're feeling about it. So if you're so for some things like array iteration, that hasn't changed super a lot. So, the answers could still be valid. But if you're looking at like, .NET Core 2.1, blah, blah, blah kind of stuff, then you're going to end up looking at the dates a lot because that's new. That stuff is newer. So something from 5 years ago may not be relevant. But on Stack Overflow, we always have these dates. So typically, rule of thumb, you don't have to follow this, but my personal rule of thumb is anything that's like older than 5 or 6 years, I ignore. Just out of the box, just off the top, I ignore it. I don't look at it. I don't open it. It goes away. So that's a general rule of thumb. And the sooner, the better. So the most recent, the better, right? So something from a week ago is much more useful sometimes than like a year ago. Now, of course, you have the balance of how that is answered and the other answers available in that thing. So is the one from a year ago going to have more answers? Maybe. Are they going to be, is the one that was just answered like a week ago, does that have like one really awesome answer? It's sometimes you just have to open up a whole bunch of tabs and read some stuff. So that's how it is sometimes. But that's generally how I go about kind of finding generalized topics, right? So language, general kind of idea of what you're trying to target, and then maybe more specific criteria. And typically I get worried if I'm at like 6 or 7 words. So I don't do phrases. I typically run off of keywords as best I can. But let's go ahead and do something that's a little more out there. Something that may not come up with like almost 20 million answers, right? So let's try .NET Core, okay? And if you don't know .NET Core, that's okay. You don't have to fly away or anything. This is just an example of something I know for a fact is going to give us less results. So you don't have to know C# or .NET Core or anything. So .NET Core 2.0, that is just my framework specification right now. So I'm already 3 words in, and I'm only doing my framework specification. Now, I want to say connect, okay? MySQL. All right. .NET. So I forgot to turn that off. I'd appreciate it if you don't annotate, please. So clear. There we go. Clear all. Yes. There we go. It looks like somebody's trying to chat, so I'm just going to open this up. So, do you have any tips for Googling on more advanced, less document coding, such as OS dev and writing? Yeah. Most of this is going to apply to a wide variety of topics. So, so I just ask that you don't draw while we're doing a workshop, please. So I am not afraid to kick you if you do it. So, okay. So, so this is something that has less results, right? We went from 20 million to 400,000. So that's quite a percentage difference. All right. So, and we don't really have any documentation off the bat, right? So the very top thing we get is set up entity framework core for MySQL and ASP.NET Core 2. It's a pretty beefy title, but if there's something at the very top and it sounds like almost what I want, then I click on it. Even if it ends up being something total crap, I always click on it. And that's because the way Google ranks things. One of the biggest things that they rank is based off of clicks and stuff like that. So usually the things at the top are going to be more visited and going to be ranked higher, on social media and stuff like that. So the ranking algorithm could get a little complicated, but basically if Google says, based on your criteria, this is one of the most top rated tutorials or documentation or whatever, I'm always going to check that out first, because the majority of the time that comes into play is it's something worth looking at. So, and I would say, 60 to 70% of the time, that gets me at least forward. That gets me, moving on what I need. Now, is it going to be a perfect representation of what you're going to need? No, you're never going to get that. There's almost never a chance that you're going to find a tutorial that is exactly pluggable into your code base and is going to work in your 100% for what you need. That's just the way it is. If you're working with like sample projects and boilerplates and stuff like that, maybe. But when you start getting into really your own applications, you're going to have your own code and your own things to consider. So what the goal should always be is to find something that gets you a good start and gets you somewhere where you need to go. And then you can modify it and tweak it to your needs. So for example, this is Entity Framework.NET Core 2. I just know offhand that this will probably work for .NET Core 1.0. Entity Framework hasn't changed too much as far as connections are concerned. But the key here is that it walks me through the basics, right? So it says in your app settings.json, add this, then go through here and make sure you add this to this other file and this to this other file, and so be it. And notice that it's also fairly short. So that's also something that's really useful, is tutorials that are short and to the point. And if you find someone that you are constantly looking up and going to, then you can also bookmark their site and go back to it if you find that's a good resource. Now, typically I Google a lot more than I do anything else. So I typically don't have one good resource that I go to for everything or for even specific topics, because people are writing tutorials all the time. Different people have different interests and stuff like that, and those interests shuffle over time. So I've always found that Google is the best resource to even look up just random things. So, but that's an example of a topic that may be a little harder to search. And basically, you can go through and kind of look at some of these. So C# corner, sure, that sounds good. Let me look at that. You go over it. It's using Visual Studio, so this might not be. And that's the kind of judgment you have to make sometimes if you're like looking up something, right? Is you may get a tiny bit scrolled down, and if I saw this, like if I was actually looking this up, I would just close the tab. Like using Visual Studio, I'm not using Visual Studio. I'm not going to waste my time spending 10, 20 minutes to try to figure out where the things are going to be different and stuff like that. So also things like GitHub links, sometimes, but most of the time, clicking on them, you're gonna get a GitHub, right? But it's gonna be more documentation than anything. It's gonna show you how to install it via NuGet. And sure, if I'm looking for a connector for Entity Framework for MySQL, that's great. But right now, what I'm looking for is what it's gonna look like when I have to add the code to connect to MySQL. So not necessarily building models or anything like that, but like literally, what code do I need to put in my application to connect to a MySQL server? So, and again, we always get the Stack Overflow. So that's always something to consider, right? So if we open this up, let's look at this. So like one sentence, thanks, that's not helpful, MySQL.data core, and AS MySQL database connection, so it's kind of a balancing act. But as far as searching is concerned, if you always start with the technology or language, that usually gets you a good start. And then try to keep your specific, what you're looking for, to a couple of keywords, right? But another cool thing I'll show you guys real quick is in the Stack Overflow, just by default, you have this more results from Stack Overflow. Now, if you click on that, it actually adds this site colon, and you can do this without clicking on that button. You can add site colon just to the search itself if you prefer. But I typically like to scroll and click. So that's how I run through Google. If you prefer to try to match everything you need in the query itself, you can add site colon and then something.com. In this case, it's stackoverflow.com. Okay, and basically this limits it to only Stack Overflow. Now the cool thing about this is almost every answer has a date, right? So I can immediately see the dates as I'm going down. Some of them don't. Sometimes, but most of the time, they all have dates. So I can quickly scroll and be like, okay, this is September this year. That's probably pretty high on my priority list. I might want to check that out, go over here, read some stuff. Oh, it's unanswered, so want. So we can just close that down. And notice that a lot of this you can do fairly quickly. You don't owe anybody on the internet anything. So, you don't have to linger and read just because you open it up. That's something that's important to note as well is, you don't have an obligation to read something once you open it. So you can open something and immediately go, oh, this looks like a pretty decent answer. Let me go over this. Or, like we had in the last one, on this one from September 1st, we can go, okay, it's not answered. Okay, just quick glance down here. There's no answer. Close. So the idea is that you find the stuff you want as quickly as you can, right? So you can read over it, kind of absorb the information, and then read over it, and then apply it to your code. Now, taking it and applying it to your code is an art in itself. But as far as Googling, typically if you follow that simple formula. So let's try something really out there. So let's say we're doing Ruby, okay, or let's say Python, right? Python, okay. Let's say HTTP server, right? So that's probably going to come up with a lot of results. 187 million. That's a lot, but that's a very generic thing, right? Like, what the heck do I do with an HTTP server? And a lot of this is going to be. A lot of this search is going to be this kind of thing where you're getting documentation on how to create an HTTP server just by itself. And I did this to kind of illustrate what can happen if you have the wrong keywords. And how do you know you have the wrong keywords? Well, in the first 4 or 5 results, if you don't get something you're after, then you have the wrong keywords. You don't have to go to page 3, 4, 5 on Google. If within the first 5 results, there's not at least one that's applicable to what you want, do some different keywords. So what I'm really looking for is a server framework, right? So server framework. So let's just say I'm looking for like Django or something, right? So right off the bat, first one is very topical. Web frameworks for Python. Open this up. Yep, we got some listings here of just random web frameworks for Python. And then again, the ranking matters as well. So Flask, very popular thing in Python. We have Django versus Flask versus Pyramid. That probably may be something I can look at to kind of get a feel for the difference between some different web frameworks in Python. And I don't even have to know about these because the ranking system in Google lets me know that these are the most popular things related to some of the keywords you put in. Now, let's just say let's just say you're looking for something more specific though. Let's say you've done a couple of searches and you're like, this is not working for me. It's, I've searched for this, I've searched for that, but I really need this specific thing. Anything you put quotes around is going to be matched and matched exactly. So what I'm basically saying here with these double quotes is I'm saying you need to include the phrase server framework. This also works for single words. It's kind of a little strange, but if you do this, it'll match the term server and it won't give you anything that doesn't have the term server in the result somewhere. So, but let's just say you've looked at server frameworks, you're like, this is not working. I need an actual thing called a server framework. So you can see that my results drastically changed. So I went down to 71,000 results, and the first result is the same one, but I get a GitHub, I get some Stack Overflow. Maybe some of these Stack Overflows have information I want, but that's just stuff I have to look through. Python Web Frameworks is a book. So my results drastically changed. Some of them are more topical, some of them are not. So it's kind of a game of cat and mouse to try to figure this out. So, but that's the basics of how I would say you can Google like topics. But let's say you have an error. Okay, let's move into that framework, that territory. And then after, we'll open it up for questions, okay? I haven't forgot about everybody. I know you guys probably have some burning questions. But let's talk about bugs for a second, or errors, right? So that's probably the most difficult thing to look up, right? Like, I have an error, and oh my gosh, what do I do about it? And a lot of you have probably already done a lot of Googling and stuff like that. And some of these things are going to be, some of these things are going to be the same exact things you have done. But maybe some of these I can enlighten you on how, some tricks here. So let's just say you get something like this. Okay. So, this is a project I've worked on, and if it helps at all, I get errors just like everyone else. It doesn't matter how long you work and you code. You're still going to get the same sort of errors, and you're still going to get things that you don't understand. And this is just a random project I've been working on, so you don't have to pay attention to the specifics. But let's say we get an error like this, where it's reference error, invalid left-hand side assignment invalid left-hand side in assignment. That is quite a doozy, isn't it? Like, what in the world does that even mean? I have a pretty good idea what it means, but it is also one of those errors that strikes me as how would you know that without having experienced it, right? So let me start these up again. And the answer is you probably, at some points, you probably won't have anybody to ask about certain errors. Like, you'll be at home. It's like 2 in the morning. Everyone's asleep. There's no one else around. I get this error. What am I supposed to do? Well, the first thing you can do, and the first thing you can try, is you can do Control-C. Okay, and we can go back over to Google. All right, and we can do, so we always want to start with the technology, even when we're doing this. So we want to do Node.js, okay, and then paste it. Now, your first gut feeling may be to put quotes around this, but I have to stress against that starting out, because some errors can not only include your specific thing. So, it may have a variable name in there, or it may have a value from somewhere that's specific to your code. So you don't want to do that out the gate. The first thing you should always do is do technology, framework, language, whatever, and then paste in the error and just hit enter. Okay. Now you're going to get a lot of things in this case. Not only are there a lot of keywords, because you don't have quotes around it, so each space represents a keyword. But you're also going to find that a lot of errors a lot of people have gotten before. So this is where discretion comes in really high. as far as priority is. You're just going to have to look at some things and read some things and see what exactly is relevant. So here we have a documentation for ref error invalid assignment. If you can find something like this, it doesn't have to be on MDN or W3, but if you find some documentation on the error, that is always a good place to start, because that is going to give you, bar none, exactly what that error is supposed to mean. Now, here, MDN is really good about explaining things. So it says there was an unexpected assignment somewhere. This might be due to a mismatch of assignment operator and a comparison operator. For example, while a single equals sign assigns a value to a variable, the double or triple operators compare a value. So that's a good note. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. : I had something missing. Maybe I need to go back and check all of my equals and object, colon, name colon values, and see if I put an equals somewhere, or maybe I'm just completely missing an equals. Maybe here I end up with maybe this means I should check and see if I have a double or triple equals where I needed an assignment, that kind of thing. So this right here can tell us a lot of things. But what we really want is Stack Overflow in these cases. Stack Overflow is going to be a huge help with figuring out some of these things. Now, I need to preference this with you might have to roll through a lot of Stack Overflow to find a solution. You may have to try something and then undo it and try something else. That is just the nature of how it works. There's never going to be a silver bullet. So if you're working on something and an error pops up and you're searching around, you've done some Stack Overflow, you may have to keep going. You may have to exhaust every possible thing that people have encountered before you come up with these, with the notion that you have something unique. I will tell you 9 times out of 10, maybe 19 out of 20 times, someone else has had that problem and someone else has figured out a solution to that. That other one time that it's not that, you have to get a little creative. But the key here is that you may have to look through a couple of Stack Overflows. You may have to go back, a couple of years. You may have to go back to 2004 and see what people are saying. Now, this particular error we're looking up is a little more generic, right? It's a JavaScript error that could mean a lot of different things. But there's also lots of specific things. So this one, he's in buffer. He's using, buffer and Node.js, I believe, and he's trying to do some things to it, and he ran into that error. So, down here, the answer is you can't assign this keyword, okay, that kind of thing. So in these cases, the question may come into account a little bit more, just because, the context may matter a lot more than if you're searching for a topic rather than an error kind of thing. But again, you can limit by site. So if you have a good site besides Stack Overflow that you like to look at, up here you can do site : and then domain.com or something, So but that's in general the way I approach errors. Let's see if we can get a little bit better of an error here, because I did have some things earlier. So there's probably a lot of things here. So maybe I don't have a good error try out, but the key here is that Google can provide you a lot of different answers. Even if you're working inside of even if you know what piece is giving you an error, you can still go over here and let's just say jQuery, right? So I'm working, let's get rid of that. So jQuery reference error. This might give us jQuery related reference errors. So you always want your first keyword to be extremely generic but to the point, right? So framework, language, maybe library that you're using. So let's just say I'm using Express, right? So Express is kind of more of a library than a framework almost. So, you know, we can do Express, reference error. That's probably going to come up with a couple of things. So, you know, it's really a little bit of intuition and a lot of keywords is really what I'm getting at. But the one thing that a lot of people miss is just that first keyword. Like that first keyword is really going to help. So it's getting about 5:45 now. And it's we got about 15 minutes left in the time here. So I'm going to open it up to questions. If you guys have any questions or anything you want to try to search for as a test, you know, we're not going to debug code or anything, but if you got anything that you're like, how would you search for this or that? Go ahead and speak up, but I'll go ahead and open it to you guys now. No questions? Nothing? Okay, well, Christine, did you have a question? Okay, let's see here.
I do, but I don't know if it, let's see if it shows my video here or not. I do, but I don't know if this is what we're talking about. I always get those nodemon errors, or how do you pronounce that? Nodemon?
Okay.
Is that something that's Googleable? I've Googled the heck out of that thing.
So have you tried this formula? So nodemon and then the error. So let's just say nodemon command not found. Let's just say you're getting a command not found error. So command not found. So, and again, my results may be different slightly from yours, but if you preference it with nodemon in the beginning, so here Node.js, nodemon not found in npm, you know, we can look at it. The question we know, this says npm install nodemon save, you know, something to try at least. That's another thing that may have not come across when I was rambling there is, you know, just try stuff. You know, most of the time it's undoable, and especially when we're talking about really esoteric errors. But here we have bash nodemon command not found. That's a very common error with nodemon. And you know, he's doing a lot of explanations in his answer, or in his question. But anyway, I usually don't pay attention to that. I just go down here. So see here, have you tried reinstalling nodemon npm I nodemon at latest? You know, that's a thing you can try. If you have any other error that you're getting with nodemon, something to keep in mind though is that something like nodemon just runs your code, so it may not actually be a nodemon error. So you may want to try to switch it up as well. So if you search for nodemon, you know, whatever, and it's not pulling up anything, think about how your server is built, right? So if you're using Express, you know, my error, that's really bad or something, you know. Switch it up. You know, if you think it's nodemon, that's awesome that you're kind of taking that leap to debug some of that stuff. But also remember that sometimes we need to switch it up and try other things. So if I'm using Express, maybe it's an Express problem. I search Express and then the error message or something like that. Or if I'm using, you know, Passport for authentication, you know, maybe it's a problem with Passport or something. You know, I would also suggest looking at. I'll try to remember to post up the last debugging thing I did, where I stepped through some debugging techniques to figure out where exactly the problem is. And that might help as well. But as far as Googling, you know, try to switch it up as far as like frameworks and stuff like that you're trying to look at, because the error may actually be somewhere else. It may come from somewhere else, if that makes sense. I think you're muted. I think. Hey, Christine, I think you're muted there.
Okay. Is that also, should I try different things like Express or Passport when it says nodemon crashed? It seems like sometimes a syntax error seems to say caused nodemon crashed. Am I on the right track with that? Can I
Yes. So something like nodemon, just remember that crashed just means it ran into a server error, like your server had some sort of error. So yes, it could be a syntax error, something like that. Just a real quick debugging technique, console log error. So anywhere that you have that error argument available, so like callbacks and stuff like that, console log it. So some places will have example code where it has like, error and then something else, right? And that's your callback. But none of the examples may have it console logging. So if you suspect an error that's happening around somewhere, also be console logging a bunch of stuff. Console log this,
Okay.
console log that, see if your data is correct, see if everything is in the state that you think it should be in. And if it's not, then I need to look at this and see why it's not in the right state that I want it to be in.
Okay, and I think I know what that is. I just want to double check. That's when you inspect you right click and you inspect your whatever.
No.
Okay.
This is going to be server side. So this is going to be, in your server side files.
I don't know if I know what that means.
Express, wherever you're doing Express and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the server side. So anything that involves Express and stuff like that, it's not going to get to the browser.
Okay.
So your errors are going to be in that terminal that's running your server, basically.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, definitely. But like I said, I'll try to remember to post up the debugging stuff that I did a couple weeks ago. That might help as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Justin's wanting to know something about debugging a hard drive driver. That's probably a little bit beyond the scope of this. We're kind of targeting stuff you may run into here at Woz U. But the same sort of principles apply. Start with your OS, Windows, Windows hard drive, or start with your manufacturer. Just the first couple of keywords should always be very specific to what you're looking for, not necessarily the problem at hand. So metadata of what you're looking for, right? So OSs, manufacturers, hard drive types, SSD or platter-based hard drives. Is it a flash drive? That kind of thing. So that's how you can kind of narrow down the results. Is kind of making sure the first couple of keywords are specific metadata to what you're doing, right? So hopefully that makes sense. But if there's no other questions, we can get back to work. I'm sure you guys got plenty of things to do on a Sunday night when class is in tomorrow, right? So, good luck on all your work, and I'll see you in the next workshop. All right, you guys have a good Sunday night.